Welcome back. Well, Donald Trump's tariffs are fueling global unrest. Mass protests erupting worldwide, with thousands calling on the president to keep his hands off democracy.
This, as America's largest bank forecasts a 60% chance of a global recession.
What if in a single morning your entire livelihood vanished, not from a flood or fire, not from war or a viral collapse, but from a single policy announcement, a new tariff, a number, a law? No sirens, no advance notice, just silence orders, dry up warehouses, go dark. Machines idle mid-assembly, your factory floor suddenly feels like a graveyard. This was the shock that rippled across the globe in early 2025 when the United States slammed its trading partners with a sweeping series of tariffs, some as high as 35%. Whole supply chains froze, industries held their breath, and while Washington was building walls, Ottawa opened its doors in the chaos. Something unexpected happened. 7 nations' economic powerhouses, resource giants, clean tech innovators, did not wait, they turned and they found Canada. Before we continue, hit that like button to help us beat the YouTube algorithm and to show your support. It began in Germany. In the vast automotive hubs of Munich and Wolfsburg, engineers and managers woke up to a 25% tariff slapped on all vehicles and auto parts entering the United States. And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at. Years of carefully tuned transatlantic logistics unraveled in a matter of hours at summer GmbH. 2,500 jobs hung in the balance orders from Detroit, vanished forklifts stopped moving, but Berlin wasn't about to let its manufacturing backbone collapse. On February 14th, Germany signed a supplemental trade protocol with Canada.
Well, Canada and Germany have officially signed a hydrogen deal. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Chancellor Olaf Scholz oversaw the signing in Newfoundland. Now this agreement will kickstart a transatlantic supply chain for the green energy.
Securing $10 billion in duty-free auto part quotas annually, and just like that, the flow reverse transmission casings once bound for Michigan were rerouted to Ontario. 70% of January's inventory was redirected in less than 3 weeks. GM Canada's Oshawa plant fired up additional lines. 350 workers were rehired.
Tonight, General Motors has announced it will lay off more than 300 employees in Michigan. Good evening, I'm Anne. And I'm David Andrews. The layoffs are coming to GM's Orient Assembly Plant and the Lansing Grand River Assembly Plant. That's where we find News 10's Jordan Bell tonight. And Jordan, explain why these local workers will start the new year out of a job.
Hamilton's logistics sector added 200 warehouse jobs to manage the flood of redirected parts. German engineers recoded their ERP systems, reabelling shipments from Detroit to Toronto, Flint to London. But it wasn't just about survival, it was reinvention. In March, Intercon, a Franco-German wind turbine giant, signed a $1.1 billion deal to ship turbine components directly to Canada's hydroelectric sector. Quebec's assembly yards began filling with NL's stamped "Made in Germany" workers. In Ontario, loaded trucks to Windsor as German wind modules arrived by the ton. Bavarian technicians ran new simulations, new logistics chains, new contracts. By April, what began as a disaster had become a strategy, reshaping the very definition of trade routes between Europe and North America. Further north, Denmark faced its own reckoning in Esbjerg, the coastal wind capital of Scandinavia. Turbine blades sat idle, some as long as jetliners. A brutal 30% tariff from the U.S. had canceled orders in a flash. Managers scrambled projects, were frozen crews prepared for furloughs. But then came Canada. By April 1st, a green technology pact worth $1.5 billion was finalized. Denmark rerouted its entire renewable energy export network to Canada. Turbine blades bound for Arizona were redirected to Nova Scotia. Solar modules meant for Florida went instead to Saskatchewan. That same week, 150 Danish engineers boarded flights to Halifax and Regina. In industrial parks across Nova Scotia, 200 local workers were trained to install and maintain imported turbine equipment in Saskatchewan. Logistics centers doubled shifts to keep up. Back in Aalborg, CNC machines were reprogrammed. Quality checks were adjusted for Canadian grid specs. Solar PV panels began shipping directly into Toronto. In a single month, wind turbine exports to Canada jumped 65% for Denmark. It meant 900 jobs retained for Canada. It meant 1,100 brand new ones. The pivot wasn't just economic, it was electric. Thousands of miles away in South Korea, the silence inside battery gigafactories was deafening. A 20% U.S. tariff had severed their ties to California. Pallets of lithium-ion modules stood still. Managers stared at spreadsheets packed with red ink, but Seoul didn't pause. it redirected on March 20th. LG, Cayman, Samsung, SDI inked a $1.7 billion deal with Northvolt Canada. 500,000 battery modules were assigned new destinations: Windsor, London. Hamilton packing crews worked double shifts. Labels that once read Los Angeles now read Ontario. By mid-May, 2 Canadian facilities each added 350 technicians trained in the precision assembly of Korean battery packs in South Korea. 3,000 jobs were protected. Olson kept its lights on, and the global electric vehicle race, once reliant on U.S. integration, was now plugging directly into Canada's growing EV supply chain. In Lyon, France, the mood was tense at a facility producing hydrogen electrolyzers. Machines capable of converting water into clean energy orders had dried up. A 30% U.S. tariff had brought production to a halt. Hundreds of millions in deals were gone overnight, but France moved quickly. By April 3rd, it had signed a $1.2 billion hydrogen infrastructure pact with Canada. $800 million in electrolyzers were set to flow into Quebec and Ontario. At the same time, a turbine manufacturer in the Paris region committed $400 million worth of wind systems to a Nova Scotia coastal project. In the weeks that followed, 250 French engineers flew to Montreal, and Toronto factory acceptance tests were held in collaboration with Canadian energy firms. Meanwhile, 180 Canadian workers enrolled in fast-track training at the Université de Montreal, mastering French energy assembly protocols. The partnership preserved 1,000 French jobs. It created 850 in Canada, but in Lyon some welding stations did go dark. One supplier laid off 150 staff after shifting contracts to Canada. A new order had emerged, rewarding agility, punishing inflexibility. Half a world away, in Australia's Pilbara Iron, or trains screamed through red deserts toward the coast, only to hit a wall. A sudden 30% U.S. tariff on raw minerals stunned the export sector. Shipments stalled, mines went quiet, but Australia was already drafting its exit plan. By April 20th, the Northern Stars Initiative was signed, a $3.5 billion minerals pact with Canada. Trains that once dumped ore into ships bound for California now pointed toward Vancouver and Thunder Bay. Canadian ports added 400 workers. Ontario steel mills upgraded blast furnaces to process higher-grade Australian ore, boosting output by 18%. By mid-May, Australia's lithium sector followed fast. A joint venture with a Canadian electric bus maker routed battery-grade lithium carbonate to Welland, Ontario. 2,100 Australian mining jobs were saved. Smaller contractors took hits, but the core survived. What mattered most was the signal: even base commodities could be rerouted, repackaged, and reforged in new partnerships. In Mexico, the tariff came like an earthquake. A crushing 35% hike on auto components severed access to American assembly lines. Plants in Ciudad Juarez, Baja Matere, braced for collapse. But within weeks, Mexico and Canada announced the Triple North Corridor Alliance, $8.2 billion in parts suspension systems. ECU's wiring harnesses were rerouted. Ontario's auto centers exploded with activity. Beampton's logistics hubs expanded. Windsor's factories ran night shifts. Mexican suppliers avoided collapse by pivoting north. Packing centers in Baja California kept workers on payroll by routing volume to Canada. By May, bilateral investment between Mexico and Canada exceeded $20 billion. The attempt to isolate Mexico had in practice deepened its trade ties with Canada, and it proved a powerful lesson. Weaponized tariffs do not break partnerships, they redirect them. Then finally came Brazil on March 1st. Ranchers in Matroso received the news a 25% tariff had killed access to the U.S. market. Beef, soy, ethanol worth billions had nowhere to go. The fear was immediate. Some projected a 30% revenue collapse. Others feared a mass wave of layoffs, but on March 28th, Brazil struck back a $2 billion trade deal with Canada, routed beef to Alberta and Manitoba, soy to Winnipeg and Saskatoon, and ethanol to Quebec. Agricultural leaders in São Paulo and Brasilia reorganized routes. 150 ranches began exporting cattle to Toronto area slaughterhouses. 5,000 ranch jobs were saved. Soy producers outside Landrina secured credit lines from BNDs to expand output, adding hundreds of thousands in revenue per farm. Canadian meat processing facilities added 400 workers. Grain cooperatives hired 250 on May 10th. Trade ministers from both nations stood shoulder to shoulder. Brazil had not just salvaged its economy, it had redrawn its map. Before we continue, hit that subscribe button to show your support to the channel. From German crankshafts bound for Ontario to Brazilian cattle, trucked to the prairies, from wind turbines arriving in Halifax to lithium modules powering Toronto, this was not a trade shuffle. This was a global migration. The U.S. believed tariffs would bring manufacturing back. Instead, they exported trust, and Canada was ready. While Washington drew lines, Ottawa offered lifelines. While American plants went quiet, Canadian ports lit up while U.S. suppliers scrambled. Canadian companies expanded shifts, hired fast, and built new alliances. This isn't just about economics, it's about identity, about who shows up when the rules change, and about what happens when the world's most trusted trading partners decide to find new ground. If you found this video insightful, hit the like button, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss what comes next. Comment below, what country's pivot shocked you?